should be 90. And you will see that it's not shock. But if we decrease the venous return further, it will decrease the cardiac output. So we just have to do this. This is why it's worth to set the time resolution to the minimal, because therefore you have more cardiac cycles within the same period, so it's quicker, it's faster. Then we set it to 80. Okay, it's okay, still live.
You should keep decrease the venous return.
Yeah, as you did in the practice, by the way. Okay, in that peripheral resistance, it's enough to compensate for the lower venous return, because the compensation during the shock is vasoconstriction, or you increase the function of the heart. But if you have cardiogenic shock, you cannot compensate with the heart. So your only thing to do is to increase the TPR, the total peripheral resistance. Okay, I decrease the
TPR.
I decrease the TPR to 122, just to show that this is shock. If you have shock during the simulation, you have to start again from the beginning, but note, it will ask for whether you want to start with the original data, which is 90 and 140. And I think it's better to continue with the same data pair. In this case, you have to change later only one. So it goes.
You mean just decrease the peripheral resistance, not decreasing the venous return, yeah?
Yeah, actually, there are pairs. So
So
in
we
this
should just
case,
decrease the peripheral resistance instead of venous return.
if you can see that in this case, 60 for venous return and 122 coast shock. Now I will increase the peripheral resistance, and you will see that as a compensation, it won't cause shock, or maybe later. Why? I just increase the peripheral resistance only by 2. Do you see? It's like a compensation. But of course, if I would decrease the peripheral resistance, it's another kind of shock. It's the vasodilatative shock. Okay, so now I will increase the venous return to, for example, 80. And you will see that for this higher peripheral resistance, a lower TPR is enough to compensate for. 123. Maybe 122. It may cause shock after more cycle length. But why? Because it's a higher venous return, and you don't need that much compensation as TPR. So what I think you should do to make a venous return and a TPR table, like 60, 80, 100, actually it goes, but after 55 cardiac cycles, 100 and 120, and search for the smallest TPR which is needed to compensate for. It's pretty similar to that of the practice about.
This one finished. You finished this one, or
No, I just wanted to figure out the numbers.
Okay.
Because we should do it, I think, as easy as it can, so simplified. So the theory is really easy. If you decrease the venous return, you decrease the stroke volume, the cardiac output, shock, cardiogenic shock. You can compensate for by elevating the TPR, but for the lower venous return, you need higher TPR to compensate for, because the lower venous return means the more severe shock. Okay, so if we, I don't really remember the data, but do you have your exercise book? Did you do? I think you did this practice.
What topic is this?
It's 8.
Topic 8.
Topic number 8. And it's maybe the last one of your practice. Yeah, this one. Yeah, actually, in this case you can also see that for a really high venous return, the TPR or PR, as we called, we used to compensate for, it was just 112. And for the 60, we needed 123. Okay?
So increase the venous return, we should.
So I think it's too much to do. Just use 60, 80, and 100, or 60, 100, and 140. And you have to search for the TPR, which is the smallest when you don't have shock. Therefore, you have to kill the heart a lot of times, and that body which is simulated. And therefore, it's easy to know that if you go back, you can set your specialized data back. So now when I do it, if we start from, and do it again. So for example, 140S venous return and 120S peripheral resistance, it won't cause shock. Then
because the TPR is too low.
Yeah. So then I set TPR for 117. Start. It won't cause shock.
How many cycles should we wait for?
20. But that time you will have
because
time.
in practice we
Yeah. Okay. The practice was a bit different because you needed 2 TPRs. One is when you don't have shock, and one when you have after 7 or 6 cycles. Okay.
How we should calculate the ejection fraction here?
That ejection fraction is always here.
Yeah.
Okay. But you don't need here the ejection fraction. Actually. Yeah. So then I decrease, for example, TPR to 115. It should cause shock. Survive. Okay, now. Okay, so in this case, 140, the 114 peripheral resistance compensated for the really, no, it's actually not a decreased venous return, by the way. So it's enough not to cause shock. But if we decrease the venous return, we need higher TPR to compensate for. This is the message you have to tell. And then you can bullshit about what is the increased TPR. It's because that the pressor reflex is higher, because the chemoreceptor activity and the decreased baroreceptor activity. But it's actually just really real bullshit. So I think it's I think the previous one was better than this one, but I think these are not the best topics to get. But I think after this These self-control tests, you know the theory behind it. Okay. So, yeah, it didn't cause shock. If I, for example, set the venous return now to 100, it will cause shock immediately. Because at this low TPR, the venous return is too low. And you know, when Professor Biro, my boss, had his lecture about shock, he described the three great classes of shock: cardiogene, vasodilatative, and hypovolemic. And then he discussed the hypovolemic shocks grades, first, second, and third. Why? Because in this case, hypovolemic, you can compensate for with the heart and the vessels as well. You can increase the cardiac output and increase the total peripheral resistance. But if you have, for example, vasodilatative shock, you can increase the heart's job. If you have cardiogenic shock, you can compensate for with the vessels. These two things actually. Okay. Now we can go to the next topic. If you
So
have,
this one is finished.
yeah.